Okay, now I'm going to bring it all together for a second and show you how to actually apply some of this information. I'm going to draw a sphere, starting with just a loose circle. Doesn't have to be perfect, just enough to give you an example. And I'll draw a table on it. Draw it on top of a table. There you go. Now, the light's going this way. Natural light. And that means it's going to catch a shadow, a circular shadow, this way. Now, I'm going to break it down to the basics and then slowly get a little bit more complicated over time. It will most certainly be darker on this side of the sphere because the light's on the left. Remember that we're working with the curvature of the sphere because it's a round, three-dimensional object. Smudging it out with the smudge stick. Blending stomp in this case. Making it a bit more gradual. And that's okay. If you're trying to let somebody know that what you have here is a sphere, this is a good symbol of a sphere. You know, if you want to make it an object, it would take a little bit more like finesse and everything. I'm going to leave an area for a terminal shine. And the terminal shine is the whitest part. It's the white highlight. Make a really faint line here. And that spot's going to be untouched by the lead if possible. And it's always 90 degrees from the source of the light, from the source of the angle of the light that hits it. The white highlight is always 90 degrees from it. It's a 90 degrees from the tangent that the light creates. Now, we've got a shadow here at the bottom that goes to. I'm going to go really faint with that too. And remember that the color of the shadow has to be pretty close to the shadow on the ball because otherwise it's not the same thing. I'm making it a light gradient from left to right. And one thing to remember is that the shadow of the object is part of the object, and the shadow of the object is also suspect to laws of perspective. So if you have good perspective on the object, you should have good perspective on the shadow, because the shadow obeys the same laws of perspective as does the actual object. The same goes for mirrors too. Like your reflection has the same vanishing points as the actual objects they're looking at. That's why if you look at the mirror at an awkward angle, it looks really awkward compared to reality. Now, the light from whatever source comes down, hits the table, and bounces back up. That's called bounce light. As a result, it's a little bit lighter on this edge of the ball before it gets darker into that area right there. And that's due to bounce light. So I'm leaving that open a little bit. I'm shading it up a little bit more. And I'm leaving a little bit of a rim around it of white light. Not white light, but like less shaded area. That's called rim light. Rim light is very cool looking most of the time. I don't think I've ever actually seen an instance of rim light not looking cool. Yeah, you want to make something look cool, rim light's a good way to go. Okay, now I'm gonna take that and I'm gonna smudge it again. Make it nice and consistent. Keeping it out of the terminal light, the terminal shine. There we go. Now, remembering that the shadow is part of the object, right? That means that the darkness of the shadow has to be about as dark as the darkness of the object. Another thing that happens here, though, is that bounce light happens in the shadow, too. So light bounces down off of the surface, back up onto the ball, giving a little bit of light into the ball, but some of that light bounces back down into the shadow. So the darkest part of the shadow is right before it reaches the object, because it has a little bit of bounce light in the shadow, too. Like that. Now, I'm still making it a gradient in the shadow. And the reason for that is kind of hard for me to explain. I don't know if I'm eloquent enough to explain these to you correctly, but as the object that's casting the shadow gets further away from the thing that is casting the shadow on, the shadow itself gets fuzzier on the edges of the shadow. So, like, look at this pencil here. It's the shadow right there next to the paper is really nice and crisp, but as it gets further away, it gets fuzzier. What's happening here is that the light photons from my lights here are interacting with the tip here, and they have room to scatter as they get to the paper. The more room it has to scatter, the more it does scatter, and therefore the fuzzier the shadow gets. So the closer we get to the ball, the tighter the shadow should be. The further away you get from the ball, the looser, fuzzier the shadow should be. So I'm going to follow that rule. That's the reason for the gradient, by the way. Trying to make it as consistent as I can. It looks pretty consistent here in real life, but I have 3 lights shining on my face. So it probably looks different on the camera right now. That being said, it still works. Okay. So when it comes to drawing in black and white like this, you're going to maximize your contrast. That's a general rule of photography, black and white photography. But you get to a point where the quality of your artwork as a draftsman or a painter is determined by the quality of your artwork as a photographer. The better of a photographer you are, the better of a black and white artist you can be. And that's all based on just general rules of composition. So, as a result of that statement, I am darkening it out to increase the contrast. I want my darks to be dark and my lights to be light. I want to be as dynamic as possible. I want to be a very pretty picture. I want to have the person who's looking at my image look at my image and forget they're looking at a drawing. I want full immersion. That's what I'm after. I want full immersion. So I want to look at my drawing and figure out what, when I look at this, reminds me that I'm looking at a drawing. Part of it right now is that the shadow is darker on the table than it is in the actual object. So I'm going to make the shadow as dark as that table shadow. Now, there's another concept that's breaking the immersion, and it's something that is the hardest thing to break in these early level 1 drawing classes. And that is the lines around stuff. So say if you watch a TV show like Powerpuff Girls or The Simpsons or something, and you think that's a good way to start. I learned how to draw from Dragon Ball Z, more or less. And I learned how to draw people as if they had lines around them, because they have lines that separate Bart Simpson's yellow skin from his background. He's a black line around him, right, around his hands and everything. But if you look at yourself in real life, there is no black outline around you, and it would look a lot less realistic and a lot flatter, more two-dimensional, and more like a drawing if I did. So I'm at a point right now in this drawing here where I want to find and eliminate the lines. I got to figure out how to do that while maximizing the contrast. So I'm going to take these lines and I'm going to darken them on one side like this. You can do it outside and smudge it out and give it a background too. But in this case, this would maximize the contrast, making it darker on the inside. So I'm taking the lines and I'm spreading out their shade to look like they're shapes and not lines. And what that's going to do is really give the object more depth. If you can find and eliminate those lines, it's really easy now because it's just a ball. But if it were a more complex object, it's a little bit harder to see, and you'll see that in the anatomy parts of this class. And also there's a better explanation of it in How to Render by Scott Robertson. So I have one more thing left to go, and that's this line right here, the line that annotates the table. The question is, do I want the table to be the wider area or the background? I think I want the background to be a little darker. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to grab my blending stomp, and I'm going to do what I can to keep all the pigment that's on the blending stomp on the north side of the line here. I'm going to try to give it a really nice, subtle, almost solid background. So you might not want to do a full solid background, which I never do, because it takes forever to color things in. It takes even longer to make them solid. So I'll make a gradient. I'll make a really subtle gradient, so you can't always tell that it's a gradient. You think, oh, that's a background, and then you forget that you're looking at a background. You forget there's even a background there at all, because there isn't one. But it's part of the immersion that I'm just looking for. I want people to look at it and forget they're looking at a drawing. I'm gonna try this. So. Yeah. So I can't rotate the paper, so I'm going left-handed right now. Not as good as my right hand, but it used to be better than my right hand. Anyway. Get rid of that arrow too. There we go. And behold, it's a decent drawing of a sphere. I could do better if I'd spent a lot of time in on it, but the fact of the matter is, this is a good application of everything that you've gotten so far out of this right here. This is how to use our shading and our lights and darks.